All right, so today I'm going to break down the newest allegations from Russian Ministry of Defense pertaining to the U.S. biological weapons production in Ukraine. These are the newest allegations. These are official. This was put out through the Russian MOD. It was posted on the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs account on Twitter, as well as the Russian MFA and MOD accounts on Telegram. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not 4chan. This is not made up. This is real. These allegations were put forth to the UN. This is Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov. He's the highest-ranking biological official in the Russian military, and he put forth this briefing yesterday morning. So we're going to break down piece by piece, because I know that some of you are lazy, and you just like to read the headlines. So we're going to break this down kindergarten style. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to explain it to you like you're 5, and I need every single individual on the planet to recognize the magnitude of the situation here and the magnitude of these allegations, because we are on the verge of World War III, if not already fully involved in World War III. So let's break down these slides. Let's break down all the individuals, government entities, non-government entities, big pharma companies, and the biolabs in Ukraine. Let's start at the top of the brief. Chief Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological General Igor Kirillov put this out. They directly accuse the United States of violating Articles 4 and Article 1 of the Bioweapons Convention. If you're familiar with the Bioweapons Convention in 1972, you'll know that nearly every nation on the planet recognizes this treaty. They understand that bioweapons are bad. It's never been violated, allegedly. However, Russia have now accused the United States of violating this treaty by the use of dual-use research. You're going to want to remember that term, dual use. This is how the United States use defensive research to create bioweapons and do it under the guise of defensive research. They take a pathogen and they increase its transmissibility and lethality in humans, and then they use that pathogen they created to study it so they can preemptively make pharmaceuticals to treat this pathogen if it were to naturally mutate this way in nature. However, in the process, they are creating a bioweapon itself, which does have the capability to get out and kill millions of people if it were to either be released or escape somehow, which we saw with SARS-CoV-2. It got out, or it was let loose and killed 7+ million people across the world. So you can claim that it's not a bioweapon, but it has the capability of a bioweapon. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. The United States are creating biological weapons, but they've been utilizing a loophole to essentially circumvent the Biological Weapons Treaty. And Russia have put their foot down, and this is their response. They also accuse the U.S. of violating Article 4. They failed to implement a national initiative to detect, respond to, legislate, and regulate all the different biological weapon production from their countries. Essentially what they're saying is that not only did the United States not go out of their way to stop bioweapons production, they were actively involved in it themselves. So, in short, bioweapons are bad, not supposed to make them. The United States are making them as per Russian allegations, and Russia want accountability for this bioweapons production. They claim that the indirect violations were the construction of military biolaboratories around the borders of geopolitical opponents, such as you'll see in Taiwan, Ukraine, Georgia, the country, Kazakhstan, all these different areas that are close to Russia and China. They no longer want the U.S. to be able to construct military biological laboratories on their border, because they're using it to, as you'll see in allegation 2, they're doing it to collect strains of particularly dangerous microorganisms endemic to certain territories. This gets into the genome-specific bioweapons that are in production now. As you might have heard from RFK Jr. or from Democrat Congressman Jason Crow, this technology does exist. The United States do have the capability to create bioweapons that are specific based on geographic location, nationality, specifically DNA sequence. So they have the capability to ethnically cleanse people, basically. This is why Russia and China don't want them to have these biolabs close to their borders, because they're able to study these endemic pathogens that they could utilize to take out their homogeneous militaries. Russia and China are predominantly Russia and China Russian and Chinese individuals in their militaries. The U.S. military is very, very diverse, so homogeneous, ethnically cleansing bioweapons would have significant more capabilities against Russia and China as they would towards the United States. So this is why the United States have looked to weaponize this area of warfare, because it is extremely beneficial to them and extremely lethal to their enemies. So let's get into the actual individuals, government entities, and non-government entities that Russia have accused the United States of being the main, criminals behind this bioweapon and money laundering plot. Let's start at the top. They claim that the U.S. Democrat Party were the main ideologists behind this plot. Those are their words, not mine. They claim Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and George Soros were the string pullers, the lever pullers, these are the bad guys. These are the ones that have facilitated this plot and did it to enrich themselves as well as advance their political power, and are able to hold on to political power. You'll know that the main benefactor of COVID-19 was Joe Biden, because he won the election based on mail-in voting, which is only made possible based on COVID-19, which Russia have alleged the United States released intentionally to make sure Joe Biden won. So here's how they claim it worked. They claim that these four individuals were the ones that came up with the plot. They weaponized these entities of the executive branch to funnel U.S. money to non-government organizations, which they also own, to wash the money, to add a layer of separation between the U.S. government and the biolabs in Ukraine. So they would send the money from the U.S. government to their non-government organizations, who would wash the money, send the money to the biolabs in Ukraine. The biolabs in Ukraine would then create biological weapons and then send it to these big pharmaceutical companies, who would then create pharmaceuticals, vaccines, treatments for the bioweapons that were being created by their partners in the U.S. Democrat Party. They would then share their profits to ensure that these people were reelected, so they can continue to create biological weapons that the big pharma companies could then continue to make trillions of dollars off of, and the cycle continues. So, the main executive entities that they claim were involved were the Ministry of Agriculture, U.S. DoD, Department of State, CIA, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, you'll know that if you've been following me, the CDC, the Agency for International Development, Walter Reed, as well as the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. So these executive entities were given objectives from the people of power, who were, at the time, President Barack Obama, Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and their puppet master George Soros, who was the main lobbyist to Big Pharma. So he was kind of the in-between man between Big Pharma and the Democrat Party, who were ruling the country at the time of Barack Obama's presidency. And they claim they weaponized these government entities to send money to these non-government entities down here via budget allocation. So all these different things that the United States were funding with your tax dollars were sent to these foundations, which were owned by the ideologues themselves for the most part. You'll recognize some of these names as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, Rosemont Seneca Foundation, that's Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's foundation, Open Society Foundation and Soros Foundation, those both belong to George Soros, the U.S. Civilian Research and Development Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, you'll recognize that name, EcoHealth Alliance, you'll recognize that name, and we'll talk about that more later, Pilot Growth. These are all the non-government entities where the money was essentially washed from the U.S. government and then sent to the biolabs in Ukraine. They did this to try to create a layer of separation to prevent governments from around the world from recognizing that the U.S. government were via proxy funding biolabs in Ukraine. The biolabs that the media said didn't exist. The biolabs that the media smeared me for in 47 plus different smear articles, but we'll talk about that later. Now, the money was sent from these non-government organizations over to the executors in Ukraine. This included the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, the Science and Technology Center in Ukraine, the Defense Ministry of Ukraine, the Ukrainian military, U.S. Ministry of Health, the equivalent of their NIH, Black & Veatch, which is a huge government contractor, engineering company, same with CH2M Hill, and then two medical companies, Metabiota and Skymont Medical. You'll recognize Metabiota as Hunter Biden's biolab company owned via Rosemont Seneca, which is essentially Joe Biden's biolab company, which Russia claim created COVID-19 and made Joe Biden president. So, these entities, their objectives were to develop select biological weapon elements, use Ukraine as a biopolygon, and conduct clinical trials of new medicines. They would take their research and send it back to their big pharma buddies. You'll recognize these names: Pfizer, Moderna, Merck, some other ones: Battelle, Gilead, Dyneport, AbbVie, Parexel, Eli Lilly & Co. All these big pharmaceutical companies were taking the research from the biolabs in Ukraine, which were taking money from the U.S. government via these non-government entities, and they were making pharmaceuticals, vaccines, quote-unquote, so they could enrich themselves, trillions of dollars worth, hundreds of billions. I've forgotten how much they've got at this point. But after they take all this money in, they use it to send back to the ideologues who essentially are making the biological weapons for them. They have a partnership. The U.S. Democrat Party makes the bioweapons. Big Pharma cures the bioweapons, allegedly. They make all the money. They share the money. And these people keep making bioweapons, and we do this process over and over. And the Russian military claims that Big Pharma were ensuring profits and financial support for election campaigns. So they had a financial interest in making sure that these people maintained their power. That's what Russia are claiming. Russia claimed that Big Pharma and the U.S. Democrat Party had a partnership to ensure they stayed in power so they could keep making pathogens that were escaping in order to supply Big Pharma with constant need for vaccine production to keep them filthy rich and essentially to, as Igor Kirillov says, take over the world. Now, we have all this information, and it's been submitted to the UN. The financial documents are there. We can go over them here. There were documentation from EcoHealth Alliance, U.S. Department of Health, going back as early as 2014, searching for new strains of coronaviruses. If you've been following me for any amount of time, you've known that I've gone over this via the PREDICT program. That's through USAID, as if you've been following RFK Jr. for any amount of time, is a CIA proxy. USAID were looking for coronavirus species in Ukraine as early as 2014. So Russia have extreme belief to suggest that the United States were intentionally looking for COVID-19 to weaponize it to use as a biological weapon. And they further proved this via Event 201, which was the event conducted at Johns Hopkins University in New York before the pandemic, October 18, 2019, which they conducted drills simulated to spread of a pandemic, supposedly fictional virus, coronavirus, even though it wasn't fictional because all the same companies that were involved in the event already knew about it because they've been looking for it since 2014. So, what do we have here? Essentially, the Russian government have come to the same conclusion as pretty much any truth seeker in America that has been witnessing what's been going on since the birth of COVID-19. The U.S. government claimed from the beginning that COVID was naturally occurring. It was not man-made. Fauci and the NIH and all these different entities and the CDC went out of their way to cover up the lab origins of COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, to ensure that the public did not know that it was human engineered. The fact that they went through those lengths would already indicate they have some level of something to hide. Russia and China are the ones that are going out and looking to find who's responsible for COVID-19, and they have deduced that it is the United States and Big Pharma, as they are the main beneficiaries, and we have the financial documentation affiliated with funding coronavirus research in Ukraine at the biolabs that the U.S. government and the U.S. media claimed did not exist. That's how I got my rise to fame, is by writing that thread about the U.S. biolabs, and it got nuked all over me talking about these biolabs, specifically because the media, who are owned by Big Pharma, have a serious financial interest in us not knowing about these biolabs in Ukraine, us not knowing that COVID-19 was human engineered, and us not knowing about this massive plot that they've been utilizing to create biological weapons, to keep themselves enriched and keep themselves making vaccines so they can take over the world via financially and politically. So, for those who are wondering, those were the allegations from Russia's military. This is not something I made up. This is not 4chan QAnon stuff. These are official allegations put forth to the UN. This has been the main focal point of the geopolitical the geopolitical landscape since March 2022. The U.S. media and Western media have not wanted you to see this. They do not want you to see this flowchart. They do not want you to know that the U.S. Democrat Party were the main beneficiaries of COVID-19 and are in bed with all of these non-government organizations and biolabs in Ukraine and big pharmaceutical companies. This is what they've been trying to cover up the entire time. So, if you have any questions, please feel free in the comments. You know I'm always willing to help. I really hope this helps some people out there. I hope we all can understand better the magnitude of the situation, because we are, if not already in World War III, we are on the verge of kinetic World War III if this is not resolved. So, thanks so much for listening. God bless.